Oh, you've just undone, hours of work.
So I have a question. So do you, when you have your students come joining your lab, do they get any training about this?
So I won't stay in character to answer this question then. So, I mean, not formally, but I think there are better resources out there, and I certainly point them towards approaches that I consider interesting. But I'd say that the one thing I think is maybe important to mention is that you can regard the writing process as part of the research process. So often when the words go down on paper, they sharpen your ideas, and vice versa. And Orwell certainly talks about this, and clarity of expression, helping with clarity of thought. So I mean, there are more qualified people than I to discuss these things. I certainly point them in that direction.
I really enjoyed this, and I think this would be of value to your students or students anyway, because in your reference to George Orwell, who obviously loved language, and in 1984, which is a book that a lot of people are reading again right now,
right.
You see the powerful use of language in rhetoric from a government standpoint. So I think that if you can get your students, and if they can become interested in language, and that's what you've, through this, you have made us kind of interested in even the simple structure of how you use language. That's, it is just a change of words here and there makes a real big difference.
Right. Yes. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I like that you basically pulled back the curtain and exposed the wizard on a lot of our tendencies and tics for communicating. What would you throw in for oral communication? Because this is all covering the written side.
I mean, that's a good question. I think clarity, similarly. I mean, I think many of the habits of good written work carry through to good oral work. I'm far from an expert, so don't take my view for it. But I think just distilling your message to the essence, I think, would be go far for both written and oral communication, and simpler messages are kind of easier remembered, I think.
What kind of approaches do you take towards training your graduate students in writing? Do you sort of tell them, all right, go give me a first draft, and then you look at it, and then you say try again? Or do you work with them, give them examples of edits to make things clearly?
That's a good question. I mean, so you can read many good essays online on how to write a paper. Perhaps the one thing that struck me in watching many good writers write is that people tend to work in quite different ways. So some people will work on one part of a paper first. Some will say never write the abstract until the paper's written. So I tend to just appreciate that everybody is an individual, and I don't think they necessarily work the way I would want to work. And so really my only strategy is just to sort of make them aware of what I think are good examples for the craft of writing, and essentially let them get on with it the way they would. But I certainly wouldn't try and advocate for the way I write, try to convince somebody else to do that. So treat them as individuals, I guess, is my approach.
Well, I was sort of shocked to discover that you were my recent reviewer 3 my most recent paper. No, but I had a serious question, which was, as a reviewer of papers, I found it recently frustrating sometimes that I read papers and leaving the science aside, the writing is horrific, or maybe deliberately manipulative in exactly the ways that you described. I've seen all these things. And I wonder, as a referee yourself, do you take the time to comment on the writing itself, and do you think that's appropriate in science referring?
That's a good question. I used to more than I do now. I think at the level of writing a review of a paper, I usually try to limit it to comments on the science, and unless there's some particularly, frustrating tactic that's been used in the writing. But I think that's a fair question, and I think if kind of offered in kind of spirit of information, I don't see any problem with commenting on writing style in a review. I tend not to do it, partly for want of time as much as anything, but I think it's a perfectly appropriate thing to comment on.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to follow up on that, because I think I also have struggled with this question, right? And it's particularly true when you review grants, because really, it's very competitive now,
right.
And you really don't want to find yourself reviewing a grant based on how well it's written,
right.
But it's become impossible not to, right? If they're going to make it that hard for you, it's hard enough. Things have to be well written. And so I think people have to take this seriously. I think that's why we have to teach this skill to students. And I guess the way that I have thought about it, it's the same sort of structure, the most important points at the end, what you introduce with. But I've always thought that we do that not to be manipulative, but because it's a formula, and it's a formula that you expect. And so when you're reading a paper, you don't have to put, the writing disappears, because it's always, it's boring in some sense, but it disappears, and it allows you to focus on sort of the arguments that are being made, because you're not thinking about the writing at all, and that's kind of the point of it. And so it's important for clarity and for people to focus. But I don't know, after hearing this, now I wonder, first of all, to use it for manipulation, but also every once in a while you read something that's so well written, and it's still written in this style, but it still feels really well written.
Right.
And I'm still trying to put my finger on what that is. I think it is all clarity.
Yeah, I think so. There's no formula. I think one of Orwell's best points is that often it's easier to string together a series of phrases that many other people have used than to kind of think very critically for yourself about what's the least thing you can put down on paper and still say what you want to say. So in some sense, the prefabricated units are there for you, and it's a form of research, I guess, like any other. But
It forces you to really crystallize your ideas, and I guess the clearer they are in your mind, the clearer they are.
Right.
Well then, if there are no further questions, we can move on.